Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you here today. Our program this afternoon is on gun violence, so I can tell that's a popular subject. We'll have a few more people than we normally do. Now I'd like to introduce Jane Benefield, who is our publicity chairperson, and she is the one that's put this panel together for us today. As you can see, we have many distinguished panelists, including our own Lois Capps, who's worked diligently on these issues over the years. So thank you for being with us, and Jane will do all the introductions.
Thank you. Welcome to the forum today. Somebody asked me where I was going today, probably because I had shoes on. And I said, I'm going to moderate a panel on gun violence. And she looked at me and said, are you for it or against it? Well, I didn't answer that question. So I welcome you to this forum, which is called About Time, Stopping Gun Violence. I think we can all agree that gun violence is a pox on our house. You are here today because you want to be part of the solution. And part of the solution means being informed. And that is what will happen today with our speakers. You're doing the right thing by being here, and I welcome you. It's a good crowd. The League of Women Voters at the national, state, and local level takes positions on all manners of economic and social issues, and we study them and we come up with a position. We lobby and inform from these positions. Our position on gun violence has not changed in 26 years, but is still completely relevant today. In essence, I'm going to read you 2 sentences of it. The League of Women Voters believes that the proliferation of handguns and semi-automatic assault weapons in the United States is a major health and safety threat to its citizens. The League supports strong federal measures to limit the accessibility and regulate the ownership of these weapons by private citizens. The League supports regulating firearms for consumer safety. It says it all there. There's more if you want to read about it, but that just is very succinct to me and states exactly how I'm sure most of us feel here. So that's the framework from which we're speaking today. We have a wonderful panel. We have 4 distinguished speakers who will talk about guns, gun possession, gun violence, students and guns, violent aftermath of guns, from a health and safety perspective, and also from a point of view of giving you something to do about it. Unless, we'll play it by ear on the questions. Mrs. Capps Congresswoman Capps has to leave. Lois has to leave at 1, so she is here for questions that relate to whatever she's going to speak about. So would like to welcome Congresswoman Lois Capps, who is soon to retire, and that will be the best thing you ever did. Trust me. Lois Capps has always been a League supporter, has not wavered in her pursuit of stricter gun control. And when I say retiring is great, I'm saying not that you weren't doing a wonderful job, but it's so nice not to have to go to work in the morning. Lois served in Congress since 1998. That's 18 years. That's a long time. But, and you still look young. Before that, Lois Capps graduated from Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma, Washington, with a BS in nursing. Many of you know she was a nurse, and she graduated with honors and worked as a nurse instructor at Portland, Oregon, in Portland, Oregon. Mrs. Capps also earned an MA in religion from Yale University while working as a head nurse at Yale New Haven Hospital. You too went to Yale, right? Maybe different times, but yeah. She's earned an MA in education from the University of Santa Barbara, so Lois is no slouch. Has honorary doctorates from Pacific Lutheran University, Pacific Lutheran.
A long bio.
Oh, well, that's. I just wanted to emphasize that this is a health and safety issue, and you have all the qualifications to speak to that. So take it away, Lois.
Oh, my. Take it away, Lois. I feel like I'm coming home. I've been here. Actually,
was it in here that we've had campaign debates that the league has moderated? I've been sitting there on the hot seat more than once. And it's my last term, so I will enter a different relationship with this community. It's an honor to be here talking about this topic. One of my extreme frustrations in my years of service in the United States Congress is that we've never been able to do what the American people have wanted us to do, which is to pass common sense gun safety legislation. I don't call it gun control. It's safety. We're talking about how we treat our automobile, which is a lethal weapon also. Very common sense. Anyway, I aired straight off the topic already. But to be on this panel, well, there's no one who knows and breathes this topic more than Tony Wellen in this town. The Coalition Against Gun Violence has been standing on the front lines in our community for a very long time, with her at the helm. And I'm so pleased that we have our district attorney with us today, Kelly, who's going to be talking, but also Kelly, Alyssa, not only did we go to the same school, but you were pastor in Connecticut at the very time of the big massacre there. And when the president recently had a White House briefing on gun safety, gun violence issues, there were some people from your community, lay people, who talked about the havoc that wreaked upon not only the school and those families, but the entire community has never, your member of Congress is right front and center on this topic as well. So we do this in the minority side, but we speak on behalf of a majority of the American people. But we have not been able, because of one powerful lobby group, we have not been able to move this country. That has got to change. A young person asked me not too long ago, how can we change this? And I said, you make sure, everybody in the country should make sure that there is a litmus test for whoever is elected to a national office, to any level, in my opinion. But where do you stand on gun safety? What are you willing to do on behalf of your constituents? Because they will be in favor of this. But it is just a tragedy that we have not been able to do more to advance our civilization here in the United States of America. It is the leading cause, a leading cause, if not the leading cause, of premature death in the United States. 32,000 American lives every year lost, wasted, mostly young people, to gun violence. It's an epidemic. And I believe it is a major public health epidemic. And that we need to act in the same way that we would act to respond to any epidemic. Sometimes it feels like action on this topic has just simply stalled. And that we have to accept now that in this country we will never be able to deal with this because it's too hard, it's too complicated, it's too much resisted. Why? Well, I just object to that acceptance. And I believe that the League nationally can really move the needle, move the agenda on this topic. Because it is true. We can protect constitutional Second Amendment rights. There's nothing that stands in the way of that. But we also can ensure that guns don't fall into the hands of convicted criminals, domestic abusers, and those who would pose a danger to our communities. An epidemic this large requires an equally large response at all levels of government. And it's important that we work together to break this cycle, which is why I am committed to stay active, doing whatever I can in Congress and whatever I can ever after that, to ensure that meaningful actions are taken through gun violence prevention legislation. At its core, we must take a comprehensive public health approach that invests in research. We can't even get research authorized for the Centers for Disease Control, and expands access to mental health services because they do go tandem. We need protection. We need legislation like a bill I introduced called a Pause for Safety Act shortly after the Isla Vista massacre to give local law enforcement the tools they need to identify violent actors before a crisis strikes. In this case, our case in Isla Vista, the parents tried to alert and weren't able. And we must address the far too frequent gun violence that occurs in domestic violence situations every day across this country. And that's why I've authored the Protecting Domestic Violence and Stalking Victims Act, which would close loopholes that allow dating partner abusers access to firearms. It's not just married couples, but often dating partners. But to make our community safer, we must all engage at every level, pushing for change at our local communities, which we have. We've got real champions in the state of California from our local legislators. But imagine what would happen if enough local communities across the country enacted change, and how that would influence laws at the state level and eventually impact our entire country. I'm resigned now that there's got to be a grassroots movement. I believe that the League could be at the forefront of doing that because you're everywhere and powerfully everywhere too. I think the momentum that is sure to spring from today's forum could be a part of that conversation that moves us forward. This is not an easy task, but the stakes are far too great to simply give up and say, we can't do anything. Our local community is far too familiar with the pain that comes from gun violence. For me, every time I'm in Isla Vista now, it's a constant reminder of the consequences of inaction. It's just a ticking time bomb. It's a congested community with young people with access. The countless other gun tragedies, events that don't make national news, but leave communities grieving. I have a colleague who represents a part of Chicago. And we have this tradition in Congress when there is a tragedy like Isla Vista, like various things in Connecticut, there's a moment of silence when we all stand at attention in the House of Representatives. And she made a floor speech one day, my colleague from Chicago, and she said, I'm not standing anymore. She said every weekend in Chicago is like this. Every day. And in every big city is congested enough, most of them, to have this be said. Enough is enough. It's time to act now with urgency. We may not ever be able to guarantee the elimination of gun violence entirely, but we can guarantee that if we do nothing, nothing's going to change. Someone else said that, didn't they? But it's true. And League has often been at the front line of making changes in this country. So thank you for continuing this conversation, bringing the attention to this critical issue. It's events like this that help our community to fulfill a pledge that it was made by Mr. Richard Martinez, whose son Christopher was killed in Isla Vista. Not one more. Thank you very much, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. That was very powerful. Appreciate that. I'm going to move on to the next speaker because we want to have time to get a lot of the facts out there that you may or may not know. Our next speaker is Toni Wellen. She's a little woman with a mighty purpose. That's what I call her. Toni is a resident of Carpinteria, yay, Carpinteria, and a practicing marriage family therapist since 1985. She's also specializes in hypnotherapy, which I kept reading as hydrotherapy, and I said, where's the pool? Toni was an elementary school teacher, primarily in Long Beach and the LA school system for 15 years. She's earned a bachelor's degree from UCLA, and do you have another one from UCI?
Yes.
2 BAs and a master's degree in psychology from Chapman University. Most importantly, Tony is the chair and co-founder of the Coalition Against Gun Violence, a Santa Barbara coalition with over 40 partnership organizations, including the League of Women Voters. Tony?
Thank you, Bev, and thank you to the League for this opportunity to talk to you about what I consider to be the most critical issue in front of the American people. I've been working at this for 20 years. I'm not deterred. I got into this struggle because of the issue of 30,000 plus people being killed. That's like a war within our own country. And today, as we sit here, there will be about 88 people will die from gun violence, and 8 of them will be children. And that happens every single day. The Coalition Against Gun Violence is your local grassroots nonprofit organization. We are bipartisan. Gun violence doesn't care what your party is. And we've been working on gun violence prevention education for 20 years. You will hear people talk about this. I have my Second Amendment rights. Okay, what are your Second Amendment rights? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the first 3 words are a well-regulated. We can regulate firearms. And the late Antonin Scalia said, this does not mean any gun, anywhere, anytime. In California, you may have a gun in your home for protection if you choose, but you may not carry that gun beyond your front porch unless you have a concealed weapons permit. Having your Second Amendment rights are regulated. We have a little 30-second PSA which we'd like to show at this time, which is about keeping a gun in your home.
Once upon a time, there was a happy family. A daddy, a mommy, 2 brothers, and a dog. One day, the brothers found their daddy's gun. Now, there's only one brother, and the family isn't happy anymore.
2 kids are murdered with handguns every day in our country, and 1/3 of those are shot and killed by other kids.
Guns, because real guns kill real people.
Okay, that's sufficient. There is a law in California called the Safe Storage Law, and it makes someone criminally liable if they negligently store or leave any firearm that is loaded on their premises where a child is likely to gain access to it. When children, all the school shootings except for Columbine were done by kids who got their guns from home. So we are trying to emphasize and get this out all over the state that if you choose to have a gun in your home and you have children, you must keep that gun unloaded, locked, and separate from the ammunition. The other thing that we ask people to do is ask. Ask saves kids. I'll talk about this at the end of my little talk because that's something that the League could get involved in. Now, this year we are going to focus on mental health. The coalition is going to focus on educating about, because that's what usually happens. There's a shooting and they say, well, this was a disturbed person and we should do something about mental health. Yes, we should. And in our state, there is a law called Laura's Law that needs to be approved at each county. And so far, there have been 15 counties that have approved Laura's Law, and Santa Barbara is considering this. I hope we'll pass it. It's very critical. A small population, this is people who are very seriously mentally ill, and their condition is deteriorating. There are very strict rules about who can be under this law. They need treatment, and they are then required to get treatment. The person would have to have 2 hospitalizations or incarcerations in the past 36 months. We call this the revolving door because these people are generally on the street and they are picked up by the police because we don't have the right treatment options for them. So Laura's Law is, I hope, going to be passed in Santa Barbara County. Also, as a response to the Isla Vista shooting, Assemblymember Doss Williams and Dickinson authored what is called the Firearms Restraining Order that is modeled on the state's domestic violence restraining order. And it is a legal tool that allows for the removal of firearms from individuals who are at risk. The family or law enforcement can, it's a process for obtaining a court order that will temporarily limit the individual's access to firearms if there are warning signs that they are a risk for violence to themselves or others. And the Pause for Safety Act that Lois talked about is the national effort. Now, we've got the law in California. In fact, we've got the best laws in California regarding gun violence prevention. Our Do Nothing Congress, there are several things that besides the Pause for Safety Act, we want them to close the gun show loophole, limit the size of ammunition clips. The Center for Disease Control, their funding was cut off during the Bush administration. And during the Bush administration, they also passed a law which eliminates liability for the gun manufacturers. And we want to change that. Now, we are all affected by gun violence, all of us. And there is something that can be passed out today, which is about what is the cost? What is the cost? It isn't just lives, even though there are, as I said, 88 people who are killed today and 30,000 plus every year. Now, since I've been doing this, since I have been working on this issue since 1994, there have been 420,000 people killed by guns, approximately. Now, in the Iraq War, as of May 2012, 4,425 Americans were killed. Now, you just have, when I said it's like a war in our country, in the Korean War, 3,000 Americans were killed. In the Vietnam War, 58,000 Americans were killed. So when I talk about this as an issue that we really need to pay attention to far more than we do, that's the reason why. But then there's an economic cost. This will really, only 1/3 of the people in this country own guns. There's 300+ million guns in this country owned by 1/3 of Americans. However, there is an economic cost, and that cost, you will be surprised to learn, comes from your tax dollars, $100 billion to $126 billion. Who pays for the emergency room, for the defense lawyer, for the ambulance? You do. You're paying to clean up the blood that's on the street with your tax dollars. And if you want to know more about that, there's this is part of what we do in education. So we are all affected by gun violence. Has anybody in this room know anybody or have been personally affected by someone who's been killed by a gun? Look at that. Look at all those hands. Now, California has the best gun laws in the nation, and they work. In 2012, the firearm mortality rate for the country was 10.4 per 100,000, and it went up in a year to 10.7. In contrast, in California's rate was 7.6 per 100,000, and it has remained the same. That's because since 1990, we have passed 50 gun violence prevention laws that are working. And if you want to know more about that, here is a flyer that will tell you where to look, and it'll tell you where to look and how to find out what the laws are in this country. I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will tell you that this year we're working on 6 gun violence prevention laws. Now, what we hear about gun violence is usually mass shootings, like what happened in San Bernardino, Sandy Hook, Isla Vista. But the majority of shootings are suicides. Over 50% are suicides, and these are older white men. You think that the violence that happens with guns is possibly gang violence. No, it isn't. Domestic violence is a far greater problem. And there's something that is called family annihilation. That is when the shooter, generally a male, shoots the children and the wife. And that is unfortunately something that happens 16 to 20 times a year. I've got all the data here. Now, what you can do as an individual, this is a card that we pass out every time we speak. It's in English and Spanish. And these cards are here for you to take. And you put it on your refrigerator. And the first thing that it says is, I will help my family to find ways to resolve conflict without anger or violence. And one of the things you need to do is be informed. Visit our website, www.sb.coalition.org. And I want you to know that I am always available to speak, to talk about this issue. When I said the League could do something, this program, which is ASK, is a national program. Asking Saves Kids. And it has never been utilized in Santa Barbara, in the city of Santa Barbara. So our parents and our kids are missing out. And this program can be something that the League could do for the community. And I suggest that you do that, and I have the information. So thank you very much. There's something we forgot to talk about, to do. There's a YouTube video which you should take a look at here. Very powerful.
It's not live, so the door comes in.
Hey, how you doing? You're interested in a gun, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay, cool. You looking for something for what, target practice or?
Protection?
More for just protection.
Just safety.
I'm pro Second Amendment, you know, so it's like, it's kind of hard to find that around in New York City, you know? It's
Like I was showing your wife, you know, the first gun I showed her was this revolver. It's the easiest gun we have to use. It's, you know, it's our most popular one. It's this 22 caliber 6-inch revolver. It's also a gun that a 5-year-old found in his parents' bedroom, went down and shot his 9-month-old baby brother with it.
When it says shooter, 5-year-old kid, dead one, what does that mean?
That's the history.
This is the gun that the guy
That's
shot.
the gun.
This is the one? This is the one that the kid used? Holy shit.
Can't take this shit back after you do it.
This is a 9mm semi-automatic. It's a very handy gun. It's easy to use. Carry it in a purse like that gal from the Walmart. 2-year-old son reaches into her pocketbook, pulls it out, shoots her. Dead, gone, no mom. Collectors love this one. Adam Lanza's mom had this in her collection too. Till he took this and several other guns and killed her. Then went down to Sandy Hook, killed 6 teachers and 20 innocent children. 20 little kids, gone, like that. He walked into a McDonald's in San Diego, killed 21 and injured 19. It's one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history. They thought, ironically, that they were protecting their 9-month-old. She thought she was protecting her 2-year-old. 9mm semi-automatic, 40 caliber compact, 45 caliber, 9mm submachine gun, 12 gauge pump action shotgun. Why don't you have a closer look?
I was pretty blindsided by just the entire history of every gun in the store.
And it made me actually think I'm not going to buy that gun.
It made me think twice, and I would not buy one.
It is one of our rights, but my opinion has definitely changed. I don't feel safe with the gun.
You don't want to be the Walmart case.
That's States United is one of the organizations nationally that educates people, and this is very powerful. Every gun in that store was used as in a killing, and the people got to learn why they shouldn't buy a gun. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's pretty powerful, isn't it? I have a cousin, my favorite cousin, who's a doctor in an ER room in Northern California. And she said, do you know what the gangs do now? And I said, of course not. I live in Carpinteria. They call it bagging them. And they take a machine gun and aim for the intestines of your nearest gang member enemy. And then the person doesn't die but ends up with a colostomy bag or they're messed up for life or in a wheelchair. It's gotten quite vicious out there. We have time for some questions. If you have some questions for Lois Capps or for Tony, and then we'll take a break and we'll come back to our two distinguished speakers after that. So, anyone? We'll wait till you get a microphone. It's being recorded.
Hi, Tony. I just wondered if you would just say briefly. I wondered if you would just say briefly what the Ask campaign is in a few sentences.
It is a program that you can go to parents in the schools and they can sign up for, because what this program is about is to get parents to, when their kids go to somebody's house or even to a relative's house, to ask, do you have a gun? And if so, how is it stored? Because your child may go to someone's home where there is a loaded gun, and this happens all too frequently. And when the parents are not around, the kids play with the gun. So always ask,
What do we need to do to fund more of these spots like you just showed, and what do we need to do to get them on television nationwide now?
Well, I don't know about nationwide. I will tell you that the coalition this year is doing a 30-minute interview show on TVSB, Channel 17, every month. And we're doing a different subject each month. On Friday, I will be taping about Laura's Law. And next month, we'll be doing a tape about the gun violence restraining order. And then we'll do, we basically watch the show and ask us, what would you like us to hear about? Now, this will be seen everywhere because it's a link. It goes on YouTube. It goes on our website. So it will be seen nationally. Even though we are just a little organization here in Santa Barbara supported by you, our community, we're pretty well known across the country. And what we do is seen. So I don't know how this YouTube video has been seen on national TV. And, but it takes quite a bit of time and effort to create something like that.
Does it have, is this on? Yeah. Does it have a share click under it that people can put it on Facebook and it could go viral?
Yes, it is on our Facebook page.
Okay. And the other thing I wanted to ask about was, is the mental health community too protective of everybody's privacy that they wouldn't put Adam Lanza and all these people on a list that they can't buy guns?
Well, there are laws for, in California, if you have been in a hospital for a mental illness for 72 hours, that's called a 5150, you are on a list in California where you cannot buy a gun. But if you recall, there was a postal shooting, 2006, in Goleta. That woman could not buy a gun in California, but she went to New Mexico and she bought one there. So we need a national list.
But could I also add, and I don't know if I think it is on, people with mental illness are more likely to be victims of gun violence than perpetrators. I mean, to say it's just about mental health is not doing enough justice to our violent country.
Linda?
And my question actually is about what Tony just brought up, the woman who had been dismissed from the post office because she had mental health problems and was threatening people. She could not have bought a gun in California. She went to another state, bought her guns there, was living there, came back to town, and she went postal, literally. And the question is, what progress is being made in that national registry or a database or something so that if someone has a mental illness, is forbidden, or for whatever reason is forbidden from buying guns in one state, that another state should be able to look up and some database and find out whether they should be selling that person a gun?
There is no progress in the United States Congress on any of these matters. Outside our task force on gun violence, which is limited to a certain number of us on one side of the aisle. And it doesn't have to be, for sure. But no, these topics come up all the time. Gabby Giffords is our honorary member, very active, speaking out.
Lois brings up an important point that, oh gosh, did it go out of my head? That they won't come to the table to discuss the issue, they being the letters that I'm not going to say, the NRA. And if you can't get them to the table, I don't know how you can negotiate. So what you have to do is then just grassroots say, we're not going to elect you people who won't come to the table at all. Thank you.
I have one comment about that. When you purchase a gun in the United States, there is a national instant background check. And we know that this is what's called the gun show loophole because they don't check gun sales on the internet or at gun shows. But this national instant background check, states have to submit those people who are mentally ill and who are not supposed to have a gun. But the states don't do that because they say they don't have the money. President Obama issued some executive orders to enable states to participate in this. California, it takes 10 days to buy a gun in California, not 24 hours. So that's, progress. And what I need to say one thing here. I think this year we are at a tipping point. People care. People are more interested in staying with the conversation. And much more, I think, is going to happen if we consistently pursue Congress.
I just wanted to add to this conversation as well is we can easily get caught up in the legislation side, but the reality is that for most perpetrators of gun violence, they don't snap one day and then decide to commit this act of violence. And so we all are responsible for understanding the warning signs of not just people who may need treatment for mental disorders, because that actually is a very rare occurrence of those who commit gun violence, but to be aware of members in our lives who are dealing with domestic violence and who may be in a very dangerous situation. And most of the time for those who are suffering, they're not able to get themselves out of the situation or to get help. And so it really is on all of us to stand up and say, there's something not right here, and maybe I need to do something about it. And that's a very scary thing to do, but that will be more preventative than while we wait for these gun legislations to happen. But it really is understanding and looking out for each other, even strangers down the street that you meet.
Being our brother's keeper.
Mm-hmm.
You get accused of being nosy, but
I appreciate all the thoughtful comments, but and maybe what I'm going to say is kind of obvious, but why do we accept that the NRA is so powerful? I think we just have to have a change in thinking, that we're the ones who are powerful and not accept that the NRA is powerful.
The reason, that's a very good question. The reason that they have the power that they do is because they give money to elect certain people who support the film that you're going to hopefully see April 7th, Making a Killing. If you don't support their gun laws, they will try to defeat you. So what we have to do is name those people. We have to have a list of the people in Congress who are given money by the NRA so that they can vote the way the NRA wants them to vote. Because if you don't, the NRA will give money to your opponent, whoever that is.
Thanks. Let's have one more question from you. Yeah.
Actually, I'm addressing somebody's question about education and access to the information, and I think it's so important to be able to spread this information, and educational outreach is huge. So I just wanted to say and invite you all to please go to the Brave New Films website. You can see a trailer on the movie Making a Killing, Guns, Greed, and the NRA. It's Brave New Films. Robert Greenwald's organization, he does a lot of very important documentary films. This is a 90-minute film that we are going to be screening at the Marjorie Luke Theater on April 7th. And his organization provides the DVD of all his films to anyone who wants to have a screening in their home or in a school or in a situation such as this. So I invite you all please to go to their website, and after the Santa Barbara screening, you can actually get one of the DVDs of the film itself and have a screening and continue to spread the word.
Thank you.
One of the things that you need to understand, we call it the NRA. It's the gun manufacturers. The NRA is supported by those, the gun manufacturers. They don't get their money from the 4 million people who belong to their organization. They get it, and that's what the gun manufacturers want, is to sell more guns and more lethal guns. And we are the biggest seller of firearms in the world.
And the number just went up to 297 deaths per day, shootings per day in America from the Brady Institute. And I'll leave you with that lovely thought while we take a break. Someone spoke to me at the break and said, I cannot believe the numbers that you're throwing out here, and that is very true. I saw a science fiction movie the other day, and this big, I obviously have a very nothing life. This monster, this behemoth comes down to Earth, and he renders all guns diffused. Nobody can shoot a weapon. And I thought about that for America. That would mean that 297 people every day are not shot, and about 90 of them are not killed. Isn't that amazing? And then there's, goes on. Many people kill themselves. That's a big number. And many die by police, but not the number that kill themselves. Also, 30 of them are murdered, and all the remaining ones are injured. So it's a terrible number. And people trying to work to lower that number are people like Kelly Scott, our next speaker. I asked the DA to suggest someone to come and speak with us on gun violence. And honestly, Joyce Dudley, the district attorney, is so helpful to the league that my fingers weren't even off the keyboard, and she offered up Kelly Scott, who I'm very grateful is here today. Kelly grew up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, which I think is very foreign to us, except you had an ocean, right? You have an ocean, yeah. You had an ocean. And came to California to attend Pepperdine University, where she obtained a BA in English and later a law degree. She was appointed chief DA by Joyce Dudley in 2012. She supervises the district attorney's litigation operations. It's an amazing job. In that capacity, she oversees the gang prosecution team, vulnerable victims unit, including sex crimes, domestic violence, homicides, and other violent crime. And my first question to you is, how do you live with this horror? And tell us all what you're doing.
Well, thank you, and thank you to the League for the opportunity to speak today. I'm very happy to be here and speak about this subject that really, I feel very strongly about, and it's such a relevant topic today in our country. And I'm sure most, if not all of you, saw President Obama's speech about gun violence in January of this year, and I think he struck a chord with many of us when he said, "We all have a responsibility." A responsibility to do what we can and should do to help end gun violence. We most often think about that, and we think, well, gun manufacturers and gun lobbyists and lawmakers, they're the ones that have all the responsibility. What can we do? But we share in this responsibility, like many of us have been talking about already today, and we can do something to make a difference, and we can do something to save a life. We can talk about how Congress isn't doing anything. We can talk about what this proposed law would not have done to stop that mass shooting. But that's not what we need to do. We need to stop the next life before it ends. And so, again, a little soapbox there, but I want to talk to you a little bit today about some of the things that you might not know that the District Attorney's Office, under the leadership of our District Attorney Joyce Dudley, is doing to help curb gun violence. You always hear about the DA's office. We prosecuted this bad guy for doing that murder and this gang member for committing that crime and this horrible sexual assault case. You know, those are things we're very proud of, but that's the reactive thing that we do. We also do a lot of proactive things, and I want to talk about that. And I also want to talk about the new California laws that have been enacted to help close the gaps in existing laws that deal with people at risk of mental illness and firearm possession, the gun violence restraining order that Tony talked about. I want to talk about that in a little bit more depth. So, but before we start, I want to show you this short video about school violence, and it was produced by the California Commission on Peace Officer Standard and Training.
Hi, hon. Hello.
Hi, Mom.
Hey, idiot.
Pick it up, loser.
You're pathetic. Gonna go cry to your mommy? What are you gonna do about it? Oh, no. See you tomorrow.
Mom! Mom, don't embarrass me.
Who was that boy?
His name's Ron something. He's a real freakazoid. He never talks to anybody. Tanisha told me he used to date some chick on the swim team, but she dumped him, 'cause loser.
Hey, Tim.
What's up, Sandy?
I wanted to catch you before you left. I noticed this morning one of my students, Ron Mackey, was drawing at his desk. I wanted to know what you thought. Was I right to show you that?
Pick it up, loser.
See you tomorrow.
You gonna go cry to your mommy?
Ron, honey,
Stay out.
I will. But you're really late for school.
What are you gonna do about it?
I'm coming.
Hey, aren't you supposed to be in school?
That's where I'm heading, sir.
So, when I saw this video put out by Post, I started to think about some of the programs that we have. And one of our most successful crime prevention programs is our truancy program. You know, the state of California requires all students between the ages of 6 and 18 to attend school. In the 2013 to 2014 school year, 31% of all students in California were classified as truant. Now, what's truant? It means a student's absent from school without a valid excuse for either 3 full days or tardy for more than 30 minutes on 3 separate occasions, or a combination of both. All right, so that's, of course, you all know kids have to go to school. So what are we doing about this? Well, our truancy program actually focuses on what are the root causes of truancy, and it's an intervention program modeled on a restorative practices. And if you think about, research shows that kids who miss school, they're not only just missing out on educational opportunities, but they're missing out on social opportunities as well. And they miss school for a variety of reasons. It could be mental health issues. It could be issues in the home, domestic violence. It could be something like transportation issues. It could be physical health issues. So what our program does is notify students in a step process and works with the schools and community-based organizations and mental health professionals and physical health professionals to identify those causes and figure out what's going on and treat them. Our program was restored in 2012, and in that time we've intervened with hundreds and hundreds of children. And in last school year, we intervened with nearly 342 truants. And actually 78% of those students actually improved their school attendance as a result of the intervention. And only a very, very small percentage ended up going through the final stage of our program, which would ultimately be the juvenile court process. So what we look at truancy in our truancy program is keeping kids in school is a reduction in crime. And if we could, if the student in the video, if we could identify him and what's going on, maybe we can prevent a massive tragedy. So some of the other things we do in the DA's office that this may seem like, oh, sure, doesn't every district attorney's office prosecute people who shouldn't be allowed to have firearms, who are prohibited from owning or possessing firearms, from attempting to purchase? And unfortunately, many DA's offices just don't have the resources available to do this. But beginning in 2012, our office began to prosecute felons who attempt to purchase firearms in an effort to reduce gun violence. And I say felons, but it's not only felons, but people may be prohibited from owning or possessing firearms for other reasons. For example, one thing we mentioned earlier, someone who had been committed to a mental health facility for mental illness, they are prohibited from owning or possessing firearms for 5 years. So if someone attempts to purchase and they are prohibited, we are able, and sometimes are able to prosecute those cases for either providing false information on a gun registration form, perjury, or an attempt to purchase firearms. In the past 3 years, we've investigated, well, this makes it seem as though we've only investigated 21 cases. Actually, we've investigated more than 21 cases, but of all the cases we investigated, we filed 21 cases in the past 3 years. And to give an example of what one of these cases might look like, this particular case, the defendant was a convicted felon. And so similar to the postal shooting defendant, or suspect rather, he was not able to buy weapons in California, so he bought weapons in another state, concealed them, brought them into California. For reasons I don't know, he pawned a firearm in a local pawn shop and then attempted to bring it back. But when he pawned it at the pawn shop owner discovered that he was not, that he's prohibited from owning firearms in California because he was a convicted felon. So we were able to investigate that case and prosecute. He was sentenced to 3 years and 8 months in prison for being a convicted felon in possession of a firearm. So that was one of our most successful prosecutions, but we're constantly working with the Department of Justice and our own investigators in the DA's office to bring more of these cases so that we can prevent gun violence. So we mentioned earlier, Tony discussed it, the gun violence restraining orders. I want to talk in a little bit more detail about this, not to get too teachy, but it may affect someone you know, someone in your family, and you're going to want to know some of the details about what this new law is. So prior to 2016, our then existing law prohibited persons from purchasing or possessing firearms if they'd been a convicted felon or convicted of certain violent misdemeanors, or like I told you, had been confined to a mental health facility. But there was this gap in the law. What about people who maybe were at risk but hadn't been committed to a mental health facility? That happens all the time. There was no legal way to keep firearms out of those people's hands. And again, these are people identified as non-criminals by their friends or family members, and who are at risk of committing some dangerous behavior either to themselves or others. So Assembly Bill 1014, and I think of it as, I was reading something about it, it's disarming dangerousness. And I think that's a great way to put it, because it's not prohibiting convicted felons. It's not the prohibition on people with mental illnesses. It's many people may be at risk for dangerousness. So Assembly Bill 1014 was introduced originally in February of 2013, and it was going through its typical process through committees when the Isla Vista mass murder happened in May of 2014. And just a short while later, in September, it was signed by the governor. So it's very, very new. We haven't seen any, from our office, we haven't seen any cases come through by law enforcement yet. But I want to go through the 3 different types of gun violence restraining orders so that you know what is available to the public as well as law enforcement. But just, in general, what gun violence restraining orders mirror are the current array of other types of restraining orders, like domestic violence restraining orders, civil restraining orders. Those are already available to citizens. And in those cases, typically the victim would apply, for example, in a domestic violence restraining order case. But in a gun violence restraining order, a family member, a cohabitant, or even law enforcement can apply. What it does is it addresses that need that the other restraining orders don't. Again, it will prohibit the individual from purchasing or possessing firearms or ammunition, and it's going to require the removal of firearms that are already in their possession for the length of the restraining order. Okay, so as I mentioned before, there was 3 types. The first type of gun violence restraining orders is probably the most critical, the temporary emergency gun violence restraining order. Now that's can be only sought by a law enforcement officer. It's similar to, if you think about it, a search warrant procedure. The law enforcement officer petitions a judge, and a judge has to make a finding. And that finding is that there's reasonable cause to believe that a person poses an immediate and present danger of injury to self or others by having a firearm in his or her possession. So that's very important. It can happen at any time, day or night, not just during court hours. So the length of the temporary emergency restraining order is for 21 days after it's issued. But it can be extended if law enforcement or a family member brings a petition in that 21-day period. And then the other thing to remember or to understand is that the restrained person, the person who is going to be subject to this restraining order, does not have an opportunity to object to this. But they are informed of it, as you can imagine, once it is issued and the law enforcement has to serve it and obtain the weapons or ammunition.
Are they informed that their family
state their name?
Well, in this particular instance, it's, oh, your question is, are they informed that their family member has contacted law enforcement and asked for this? Well, in the temporary emergency restraining order, only a law enforcement officer can ask for it. Okay, but in the next ones, the ex parte gun violence restraining order, ex parte is just a Latin term for one-sided. So the immediate family member or law enforcement can ask for this. This happens during regular court hours. It's so that it can be issued or denied that same day. And the standard is different than the temporary emergency order. What it is that there is a substantial likelihood that the subject poses a significant danger in the near future or personal injury to self or others by owning or possessing a firearm. So you may wonder, well, what does the court consider in these things? The court will take testimony from someone petitioning for this order or any witnesses, and they consider evidence of things such as recent threats of violence or acts of violence directed at someone else, recent threats or acts of violence directed at themselves, any violations of a protective order of any kind, convictions of a violent offense, a pattern of violent acts or threats within the last year. And the court can consider other evidence too, such as substance abuse issues, mental health issues, things of that nature. And the duration, again, of this restraining order is also 21 days. So what happens after the 21 days expires? So the next type of gun violence restraining order is the gun violence restraining order that's issued after a notice and hearing. So this is within those 21 days, if the family member believes that there is reason to continue to extend the restraining order for up to 1 year, the restrained person gets notice of this and they're present at a hearing in which the court considers those same factors that I just talked about for the ex parte hearing. And what the burden on the petitioner is to show clear and convincing evidence that the subject of the petition poses a significant danger of personal injury to themselves or others by owning or possessing a firearm, and that this restraining order is necessary to prevent that harm. So a restrained person can, let's say someone is restrained for a year order. That restrained person can actually has one chance to request a hearing to terminate the restraining order within that 1 year period. For example, they could request a termination because circumstances have changed. They've maybe received some mental health care and are now on medication, and maybe a doctor indicates they're now stable, something to that nature. And the court could terminate it if they find there's no longer a threat. But the petitioner can request a renewal of the order as many times, it's unlimited, during that year period if there's still, the standard can be met, that there's a substantial likelihood. So some of the challenges to this new law have been from cohabitants. So, for example, let's say you lived with someone who was subject to this restraining order. Well, what about the guns that I legally own? And so the law addressed this and said there's no seizure of the cohabitant's guns if two conditions are met. Those conditions being that the cohabitant legally owns or possesses the firearms, and that they're stored in a manner that the restrained person cannot have access to. So I do believe that the law contemplated all of the challenges to people who are going to say that their Second Amendment rights are being violated by this, but that's been taken into account. Now, what happens if someone violates a gun violence restraining order? So the restrained person who knowingly violates a restraining order is maybe charged with a misdemeanor. And if they're found guilty, the restrained person is prohibited from owning or possessing a firearm for 5 years. So I wanted to point this out, not to say that this, by any stretch of the imagination, is going to end gun violence. But it can be a proactive way to deal with those gaps in existing laws, and a proactive way to deal with someone who's at risk of dangerousness and has access to firearms. You know, I think I said this earlier, but I hate to get lost in arguments about past shootings and would this have prevented the Isla Vista mass murder? Would this have prevented Sandy Hook? That's not the argument. It's really, what are we going to do to try to prevent the next one? And so in closing, I want to turn back to what President Obama said in his January speech and in an op-ed. I don't know if any of you read the New York Times op-ed in January. And it's about change. And I just want to read this to you because I think it's so powerful. He said, "Change will be hard. It won't happen overnight. But securing a woman's right to vote didn't happen overnight. The liberation of African Americans didn't happen overnight. Advancing the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans has taken decades worth of work. Those moments represent American democracy and the American people at our best. Meeting this crisis of gun violence will require the same relentless focus over many years at every level. If we can meet this moment with that same audacity, we will achieve the change we seek, and we will live a stronger, safer country to our children." I feel so strongly that grassroots organizations like the League of Women Voters here today and all of you here, we represent that change, and we've got to keep moving and keep doing everything we can to help change gun violence in our community. So thank you.
I'm sure you join with me in feeling the passion that Kelly has conveyed to us. Thank you so much. We're going to wait for questions till after the next speaker, and her name is, I can't say your first name. Alyssa. I have tongue twister for me, is Reverend Alyssa DeWolf, who became the lead minister of the First Congregational Church of Santa Barbara just recently. She has worked as a youth minister throughout her life and as a hospice chaplain at a veterans hospital in Connecticut. You're a very good person. I just want you to know that. All of you are. Originally from Orange County, she graduated from New York University and attended Yale Divinity School, where she began the official ordination process. She is passionate about LGBT rights, hunger issues, interfaith collaboration, and many more justice issues. Outside the church, she is an accomplished gospel singer, a movie buff, love that, and all-around self-described nerd. Right on. So she was also an associate minister of Newtown Congregational Church in Newtown, Connecticut, when the shootings occurred. During her time there, she worked with the church and community as they experienced and began to heal from the tragic Sandy Hook shooting 3 years ago. So let's hear her story. Thank you.
I just put it down for the shorties. I just want to thank the League of Women Voters for having me here, and also for Tony Wellen, who connected me with this wonderful organization. So I am currently the pastor of First Congregational Church on State Street. I'm the lead minister there, and I've been there for about 1.5 years. And ironically or serendipitously, in the way we do our calls for ministers, about a week after I was officially called, the Isla Vista shooting occurred. And at the time, I was still the associate pastor in Newtown Congregational Church, and my exit from that church was a very difficult thing for all of us because we had grown to be such a family. But when they heard about the Isla Vista shooting, they all knew that I was being called here. I felt otherwise. You see, I have had the honor of working with many people, with veterans, with family members, with Sandy Hook, and now with this community in Santa Barbara, in moments of great tragedy and great death. And what I want to convey to you is, I don't want to be here talking to you. I have to be here. I have to be here because I went through something and walked through something that was horrible. But if you take anything from anything I say today, it is you who have a choice. Those of you who have not had to go through something like Sandy Hook or any sort of other gun tragedy, it is you who have the power and strength and resiliency to do the work that for those of us who are healing need that time and that strength to put towards reaching a new normal. So if you can take anything from this, know that you are truly the advocates, the voices, the hands, the feet for all of those, myself included, who are journeying through a world that is now framed by a tragedy. So I'm here to talk more about what it's like to go through something like this. So I was a full-time student in seminary in December of 2012. And I had just finished my semester and had put off a couple papers like good graduate students do, waiting to write them at the last minute. And I had extended my time in Connecticut because I wanted to finish up some of the Advent and Christmas events that the church would be putting on. When my roommate at the time, who was in Texas at this point, texted me about the news. Have you seen the news? There's something about the church and the town you work in. And it took somebody in Texas watching the news for me to know that this was going on. And so quickly I changed clothes and got in the car and headed towards Newtown. Nobody is prepared for something like this. No matter how many classes you take, no matter how many doctorates you have, no matter what experience you have, no one is prepared to go through a situation like Sandy Hook. And so I felt that more than anything because I was a student as well as the acting associate minister of the church. And on my way there, I called one of my professors who had taught a class on death and dying and grief. And she said something to me that would help me get through those days. She said, Alyssa, you know what to do. Because all I felt is, what can I do? What can I say? What can I be in this moment in such a horrible, horrible situation? When I arrived in Newtown, I was able to contact our senior minister only a few times in the day. You see, he had gone with other clergy, interfaith clergy of the town, to be at the firehouse, which sits just a few blocks away from the school. And it was in the firehouse that families found out that their children had died. And it was in the firehouse that families came to pick up their children who had survived. And it was there that ministers and clergy and emergency personnel stood for hours and hours and hours working with those families and trying to understand what had occurred. And in conversation with him, he asked me to call the families in our community. And at the time, I didn't even realize the weight of what this meant. But I sat down at the phone and I called every family on our Rolodex that had an affiliation with Sandy Hook, not realizing that the person on the other end of the phone call might have just lost a child or a teacher or a faculty member in that school. And it's always been difficult in the years preceding because many people, the first thing they ask me is, well, did you lose anyone in your church? And on one hand, no, we didn't lose anyone in our church, in our actual congregation. But Newtown is an incredibly small town. It is spread out, but it is very small. It is the quintessential postcard New England town. It is the town that you see on television, in movies. But every single person knew somebody that was affected or passed away. We had students who were at that school that day. We had the nurse who was the nurse for Sandy Hook attended our church. We had neighbors who babysat some of the kids who were killed. We had people who knew everyone, and everyone was affected. And the unique thing about Newtown is it wasn't just one small group of people who were mourning. It was an entire community that was put into a time of grief. On the second day, our denomination, I'm a part of the United Church of Christ, which is a Christian denomination, we have a deal with the Presbyterians that in times of great tragedy, we send supplies and they send mental health help. And so these blue shirt people showed up on our doorstep. And ironically, this Santa Barbara and Newtown are so linked for me. 2 out of those 3 people are actually local Santa Barbarans who still live here. And they arrived that day and they took myself, Reverend Matt Krebin, the senior minister, our administrative assistant, and some volunteers, and sat us down and basically told us everything to expect and what was going to happen. And one of the first things they said to us is it takes a minimum of 10 years to heal from something like this. So when the nation is in mourning, the nation mourns with you in a tragedy like this for as long as the news cycle. And then the nation will mourn with you again when like anniversaries pop up or when other gun tragedy happens in Sandy Hook's case. But for those who are actually living in the community, for those who actually have gone through it, even those who have moved away, it takes a minimum of 10 years to be at a place in your life when you still have the scars, but you no longer feel the sting of that pain. And in knowing that, it helped us sort of know the trajectory of how we were going to help the community heal. And one of the other things that the magical people in blue shirts said to us was, for those who are first responders and pastors, those who are doing the work of healing, you will not get to process this or heal from this till everyone else you are taking care of is okay. So know that your grief is going to be delayed. And this also applies for the children. So many people say, well, the children are so resilient, they're resilient. Children, especially at the age of those who died and were affected by this in Sandy Hook, are not at a developmental level to understand what had happened to them. They are, however, at a developmental level that later on in their life, they will have moments of, in essence, PTSD, where they will find themselves reacting in different ways, where you might not see someone, a child affected by this trauma, you might not see the effects until junior high or high school, and they come out in very unique, interesting, unexpected ways. And so knowing that too and understanding that, instead of just praising the resiliency of the children, there was a flood of resources that came into town. And one of the other things that the blue shirt people said was, it's going to get worse. And at that time, the phone did not stop ringing for days and weeks on end. Our emails were filled to the brim, and then the stuff started to roll in. Because when we, as a nation, are affected by something like this, you ultimately want to do something. You are moved by sorrow and grief that you want to help and heal. And if I can say anything, is that emotion in itself is good, and you should feel that emotion. When something like a gun tragedy happens, when a death occurs that is not someone passing of old age, but is someone being killed too soon, you should feel outraged and upset, and you should feel the grief. But if you want to do something, don't do something for that community. Do something in the name of that community. For example, I have pictures, and if anyone would like to see these pictures, and I also have a sort of PowerPoint presentation that goes with some of what I'm saying. I'm happy to email that to you, but I have a picture of one of our classrooms in our church. And because of the fact that we were Newtown Congregational Church, all of those people, those thousands and millions of people who felt that burning to do something, Googled Newtown, and our church and about 2 others in town popped up. So what do? If you feel called to do something, you send it to the first place that has the name Newtown. And a poor town in Pennsylvania also is called Newtown, and they got sent stuff too. But in one of our classrooms, we had over 50,000 stuffed animals from floor to ceiling. And I am not exaggerating when I say they went from floor to ceiling. If you cut this room in half, that was the size of the classroom. And we were only one community that received those gifts. We received millions of snowflakes. People were urged to make snowflakes. There were bicycles that were sent. There was clothing. There was everything you possibly could think of that was sent and inundated into this community. And anyone who has ever lost someone, just one person, you know that in those immediate days and weeks afterwards, you are rendered almost incapable of doing your daily life tasks. Now, times that by 26. And then times that by all of the stuff that now this community has to sort, organize, find a home for. There are not 50,000 kids in Newtown. Dogs got stuffed animals. And actually what our community did was a lot of those stuffed animals went to a town called Bridgeport, which is one of the poorest communities in the entire United States. And this is where I say, when you feel moved and called and you don't want something like this to happen again, a community like Bridgeport, a community like Chicago, LA, Oakland, Fresno, Santa Maria, that suffers gun violence and poverty on a daily basis, they can use those gifts and time and energy and money and resources more than the town that is grieving. One of the things that we experienced, and I'm a pastor, so I can talk for hours, so cut me off. That's totally fine. One of the aspects of going through a tragedy like this is, for one, we're told it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse in the sense that you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff. We couldn't go to the bathroom because the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Multiple lines of the phone. You had to sprint to the restroom. And hopefully nobody else in the office sprinted at the same time as you. I say this from experience. But what also occurs, and what was unique about Newtown, and I would assume would also be unique about Isla Vista, is that we were 2 hours from New York City, and Isla Vista being around 2 hours from Los Angeles. 2 major hubs that house news companies from not just the United States, but from around the world. So when something like this happens in a more rural setting that is much more difficult to get to, they might not have as bad of a degree of this problem. But we were inundated with so many journalists and newscasters that it was, in a way, a blessing, because it gave us one physical thing to be absolutely angry and livid at. And you need something to channel that energy. It was the journalists and it was our copy machine. But, and I'm sorry if there are journalists in here, but it was absolutely horrible. We had the advantage, our church, in a really spectacular, this never happens in New England congregational churches, sold their original building and moved down the street in a neighborhood. So it was, the church itself was housed in a neighborhood with a parking lot around it, and then it was residential. So it was all private property in essence. So news vans could not park their cars in our property without our permission. But the Catholic Church, which lost the most people in the entire community, the Episcopal Church, and the Methodist Church were all on public property. So even if you couldn't park your car in the Catholic Church's parking lot, you could park your news van across the street. So when the funerals happened, and in our instance, we could ban all journalists, they could not do that. That they would still sit there and take pictures of those who were mourning and those who were coming out from the funerals. And we would get phone call after phone call, and you would talk to the lower person in ABC or NBC, and you would tell them, no, we don't want to talk to you. Then you would get their boss. Then you would get their boss. And then you would get the CEO. And it was always, what's the story? We want the story. We want the greatest scoop. We don't care about the greatest scoop. I have one family out of over 300 families in our church that they just lost their neighbor who was the kid that they babysat, who are rendered completely inconsolable, and times that by 300. I'm dealing with that. I don't want to take time to talk to you. And reality is that most of the new agencies didn't care that we were mourning, didn't care what we were going through. In fact, I had one gentleman who said, quote unquote, well, you know, if you talk to us, that usually means people will give you money during these tragedies. Because that's all we cared about at the time. And as a sort of side note for anyone, if there's ever a sort of national tragedy that occurs, what I recommend to everyone is do not watch the news for 24 hours. Honestly, do not watch the news for 48 hours. Most of it is wrong. There are 2 news agencies that I have great respect for out of all of this. And not being a New England stereotype, but NPR will not report anything unless it is verified by 3 sources. And The Guardian from the United Kingdom does some of the best reporting on American news than anyone else. Those are the only 2 that I found in the entire time, and still to this day when other tragedies, that will actually give you credible news. So one of the things that I want to end with, for me, this is personal. And for me, this is something that it's going to take me over 10 years to heal from. And as a pastor and a leader in the community, I'm barely dealing with my grief. I wasn't able to really sit down and read the news like everybody else did. Because if I read the news, if I knew every name, if I knew every detail, I would not be able to get up in the morning and do my job. So for me, things like this where I get to come here and talk to you about it, it's a healing process. And what I encourage each and every one of you to do is those of us who are healing, it is my honor and privilege to stand here, but it is my choice to stand here. But for so many other people, they just need to use their energy and their time towards rebuilding their lives. And if you could do anything, it would be to stand in their place and to be the voice to the politicians, to your local community members, but more than anything, to see each other. Because it's when we see each other and recognize that we are all humans, in my faith that we all are created by God in God's image, that these issues of gun violence and gun prevention and gun control become issues of people who are loved, who are neighbors, who are brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, friends. These are the people that we want to live the best life they can live, the longest life they can live, with the best resources they can find. And so never forget to look each other in the eye, to say hello to the stranger on the street, and to not think that that person and their problems are not your problems, because we are all in this together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. In fact, I can't thank you enough. That was from the heart. We have a couple minutes for questions if you have any.
I
Okay.
guess this is, I guess this is before the district attorneys. I remember when the shooting happened in IV, and evidently the family was notified that, that there was going to, someone's going to do this shooting, and they called 911, and they told them, but the phone call, they called on a cell phone, I guess, and it went to the highway patrol, then got rerouted to Santa Barbara, and then eventually ended up in IV. And so there was no real connection from, being able to stop it because of the how the 911 call was rerouted. I was wondering if this has been fixed in any way, because I've heard of other incidences similar to the rerouting of the 911.
Well, I'd like to first say, the timing was not such that a call being routed properly could have stopped this. Law enforcement acted so quickly and so courageously. I don't have on the top of my head right now the number of minutes, but from the time the call came in, I want to say it was between 5 and 6 minutes before law enforcement had this under control. It was a Herculean and heroic effort. Now, it is true, you're correct. Any call, I don't know if in entirety of California, but in our area, and I believe in most of California, if you call 911 on your cell phone, it goes to CHP dispatch. In our area, I believe that CHP dispatch is in Ventura, and then the call is routed to the appropriate place. That's not unusual. It has to do, and I can't speak to this articulately, but it has to do with radio towers and communication and contracts. But that's very boring. But I will say that it's not accurate to assume that a number of minutes would have made any difference here. I think those facts are just a little off, yeah.
Okay, thank you. One more question, and then we're going to wrap it up. Linda, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. Well, actually, I just want to make a comment.
Okay.
I began teaching in Oxnard in 1976, and I retired on the day of the Newtown shooting, just by pure chance.
Oh.
It was just before Christmas break. It was our last day, and I had 36 years, I had the age, and I was done. But one of the things that bothered me my last few years, when I first started teaching, we had fire drills. Mm-hmm. And then after 20 years, we had earthquake drills. And my last 3 or 4 years, we had monthly shooting drills. And I taught second grade, and when we had the alarm, we had to lock everything down, close the curtains, close the doors, tell the children to hide in the corner. And it's a sick atmosphere. And it's something very wrong in our country that we've gone from where we were in 76 to where children are now. And that's just my comment.
Thank you. That's a good note to end on. Thank you so much to the speakers, and I'm really glad you came today.
One quick reminder, I'm sure you noticed that we have videotaped this forum, and there's so much incredible information. Thank you all to all of our speakers, because you've added to our understanding and the depth, and particularly to Reverend Alyssa. Oh my, that is incredible. We deal in facts at the League, and we don't always get into the emotion. But your presentation was spectacular, and I'm sure that these are all things that have such resonance for so many. Thank you all, and remember, you can see this again, lwvsantabarbara.org. Thank you all for being here. See you next month. Goleta Development, another exciting issue.